Just about a week and a half ago, a report came out, and I got to do report, called Alternative Influence, the Reactionary Right on YouTube. I made a quick video about it at the time, and I didn't really have the time to sit down and go through why all of it is factually incorrect, why it is a conspiracy theory, and I probably won't be able to do that in this sit-down video, but I do have a lot to go through. Why it's factually incorrect, misstatements made by Becca Lewis, contradictions, she argues against herself in some positions, and I even have confirmation from a New York-based journalist that the connections in the graph are not real. And this is going to get a little bit complicated. But the bigger point is that while I wouldn't normally do something like this, using the logic of this report, I can directly connect Data and Society to the Daily Stormer. And I don't mean by some long, ridiculous line. I mean literally one of the board members of the Daily Stormer has been accused of praising, speaking in defense of, or, I mean, in some instances, actually appearing on podcasts with someone who has a giant swastika on their chest. Again, it's not something I would normally bring up because I think there's a reason why people communicate with even the most intolerant ideas so that our society can understand it. But this report from Becca Lewis is attempting to deplatform people she just doesn't agree with, and it doesn't even make sense. So first, I want to start by addressing Dave Rubin and what Ezra Klein said, and then we're going to move through this report and I'm going to break down everything wrong with it. On the 21st, Rubin tweeted, "In case the goal of that insane graph wasn't clear enough, allow the author to explain in her own words about how this is about getting people she doesn't like booted from online platforms." He linked to an image of the graph from the report, which we'll go over, and he linked to this snippet from an interview. BL is Becca Lewis, and she said, "That's a fundamental question that's been plaguing academics and tech firms alike. My interpretation is that the framing of social underdog paranoia thrives when content moderation and platforming happens inconsistently and without clear explanation. And the fact is that if extremists were being consistently deplatformed, they wouldn't be able to make content about it." The report says that some things that already do exist should exist. Basically, that people on YouTube should be responsible for what their guests say. They are. She says that YouTube channels with more influence should be held to a higher standard. They are. Plain and simple. She's arguing for things that already exist, but the biggest problem I have with it is that in the way she frames the whole report, she absolutely smears and lies about me. Because I will say it definitively, I support social justice, but I oppose authoritarianism. I am for left-wing policies, and I don't disagree with feminism. My criticisms of what people refer to as SJWs, as I've said before, is that it's a term that typically refers to violent authoritarianism, groups like Antifa, who recently clubbed a progressive Bernie voter over the head in Portland. This really happened, but now let's take a look at the report, and I'm going to show you some of the factual errors, so you don't have to argue about my opinion. You can say I'm wrong, you can disagree with me, but let me show you the factual inaccuracies and the, in my opinion, willful omission of information to try and paint a wrong picture and mislead the press. In the middle of the graph is little old me, Tim Pool, and you can see that there is a direct line from me to Destiny. I called this out. Destiny is far left. I have never interacted with Destiny. There is also a direct line from me to Stefan Molyneux. I have never interacted with Stefan Molyneux. I have not appeared on his show. Admittedly, when I first made my last video, I said that the line from me to James Alsop clearly must be a mistake. However, I have since learned that while I was in Portland, James Alsop had a camera person go up and he started asking me questions. I didn't know that was the case, but there's also a line from me to Coach Red Pill. There's even a line from Chris Ray Gun directly to Richard Spencer. And this is where I can call absolute BS because Chris Ray Gun does not make anything like political content that the rest of these people do. Chris Ray Gun makes music videos and commentary videos, and he made a comedy video about dating once. Now, what some people have said to me is, Tim, perhaps it's just a line from Spencer to James Alsop. And that may be the case, that it's simply they placed Chris Ray Gun's node on top of this line for some reason. I can't imagine why, because if they were making the visualization, they could simply move Chris Ray Gun's node down only a few little spaces. And if that was the case, then the line wouldn't intersect. So I can only assume intersections are legitimate. It would make no sense for them to intentionally put Chris Ray Gun's node on top of a line between Spencer and Alsop, unless they were trying to mislead people into believing that Chris Ray Gun interacted with Spencer. But beyond that, It says, each line indicates that two connected influencers appeared in the same YouTube video during the period of January 1st, 2017 and April 1st, 2018, serving as guests, hosts, or collaborators. It would be a leap, an assumption, to say that the node on top of this line with lines emitting from it was simply placed there by mistake or is actually just on top of other people's lines. There is a line directly from Spencer to Chris Ray Gun. There is a line directly from Tim Pool to Destiny and Stefan Molyneux and Kaylin Robertson. But now I actually have a statement from a New York-based journalist who said me this. I just heard back from the researchers. The chart is confusing some connections, and many are not actual. But there are a couple that are from one of Sargon's old live streams. They're sending me links. And this is in reference to the fact that, yes, I was incorrect about some of the connections because I did appear in a Sargon live stream while I was at a party at VidCon. So yes, they were able to connect me to some people, like some black guy, because I was at a party that some black guy was at. I never actually met him, we never did a video together, but we had both appeared on someone else's video and thus she drew the connection. However, the connection to Destiny, Stefan Molyneux, and a few others is fake, and apparently, according to a New York-based journalist who I'm keeping anonymous for the time being, they even admitted that. They said that Blonde, Stefan, Destiny, and Coach Red Pill are all just confusions of the visualization. And you know what? I would say that was fair, but it's entirely unnecessary for them to do. There was absolutely no reason for them to put my node right in the middle of a bunch of other people's lines. All that can do is confuse people. In fact, I don't even think confuse is a fair statement. I would say mislead, because the graph says a line between nodes indicates a collaboration or appearing on someone else's video. In which case, placing Chris Ray Gun's node on this line, they didn't have to do it. They could have moved it over here, and that line would have not intersected with Chris Ray Gun. There is an empty space right here. They could have put his node. I can only assume it was intentional, and I don't really know why. I additionally want to point out that during the time frame of this, where they connect me to some people I've never interacted with, and try to claim that I'm radicalizing people, I have this video, which is an interview at the Mic.com office, where we actually talk about and defend progressive news websites like Mic.com. This is a friend of mine. She is a researcher for Mic.com. There's also an interview that I did. It's about 10 minutes long with someone who is an anti-fascist, and they explain why they do what they do and why they believe what they do. This is also on my YouTube channel at the same time. But more importantly, I have a debate with this man. He is a self-described SJW. He asked me to call him that. So I said live debate with SJW, and I put SJW in quotes, and we actually find that we agree on most things. Personally, I believe that it might have been a hoax attempt because Rebecca Lewis researches media manipulation. And she has actually criticized mainstream media and the New York Times for trying to be objective. But in the report, she actually calls out objectivity, which is confusing to me. If she herself is critical of objectivity, why then would her report support it? Or at least criticize us for not wanting objectivity? I want to point out, I may be the furthest left person. Actually, no, I take that back. Destiny is the furthest left person on that chart, but I might come in second. Maybe Bunty King is a little more left than I am. I'm not entirely sure. But her inclusion of me was specifically about the mainstream media. She doesn't talk about anything I believe politically because I usually don't talk about it. She says these influencers explicitly reject the trappings of institutional prestige. I don't. Adherence to objectivity. I don't. And neutrality. Certainly do not. And the enforcement of gatekeeping mechanisms that dominate mainstream news media. Absolutely not. In fact, most of the interviews I do stem from interest from the mainstream media. But let's take a look at exactly what Becca Lewis has said herself in the past. I was able to find an archive of Becca Lewis's Twitter account. This is the author of the article. She purged her Twitter account before publishing, but one of her tweets says, "I'm so pissed about this. NY Times op-ed, your incessant both sidesism is reinforcing racism time and time again. Both sidesism is a dig at news organizations attempting to get both sides of a story, which there are. Specifically, if there's an event like Charlottesville, and protesters show up to protest those attendees, there are two sides. You need to talk about the attendees, why they're there, what they believe, and those who oppose them, why they're there and what they believe. There are two sides. In fact, often there are more than two sides. But both sidesism is typically used as a criticism of journalists who try to remain objective. But this is just one tweet, right? And maybe she's just talking about one story and she really does like the mainstream media. However, she's actually accused the mainstream media of essentially being inept and easily manipulated. In a report she published last year, Becca Lewis, she says, I research media manipulation and misinformation at Data and Society. I write about media, technology, and politics. She said, journalists often adhere to their professional norm of objectivity by promoting, quote, both sides. of a story even when one side is less valid or plainly incorrect. Using this, the far right has promoted a false equivalency between themselves and the far left in recent months. My conclusion is, she personally does take issue with mainstream journalists promoting both sides. She calls it promoting. This is heavily biased language against news media, and she puts both sides in quotes because she really doesn't believe that a journalist should do this, in my opinion. Look, you can assume why she put both sides in quotes, but then she says the far right is able to promote a false equivalency because the media adheres to this, and this section is even highlighted. When I read this and started going through her history and her bias, she does have criticism of the mainstream media, but then she accuses the people in the alternative influencer network of being critical of the mainstream media, and sure they are, but why then would someone who kind of agrees then play up the idea that we reject objectivity? No, in fact, many of the people in the alternative influencer network probably do reject objectivity, this idea, and believe in just expressing your bias. But I, for one, have spoken time and time again about the importance of objectivity. In fact, I've actually given guest presentations at Columbia University's journalism school on more than one occasion. I've actually spoken at MIT, their media lab. So I've talked about the importance of objectivity. So I don't want to criticize other people in the study simply because they're willing to have debates and conversations, but I will criticize this study for being factually incorrect, and it seems like most people didn't even read it because several people who are considered to be far-right white supremacists or neo-Nazis have been platformed time and time again by the mainstream media, much to the, I will agree with Becca Lewis here. The mainstream media does this. Why then will she criticize those on YouTube who do the same thing? For instance, Andrew Auernheimer has appeared on HuffPost Live, and he's associated with the Daily Stormer. And there's a reason why I bring him up. Full disclosure, I have interviewed Weev, and I know him. I haven't seen the guy in a really long time, but I have done interviews with him. The reason I bring him up is because of the connection between Data and Society and Weev himself. One of the individuals on the board of advisors for Data and Society is Gabriella Coleman. Full disclosure, I know her as well too. She has written books about trolling the internet and even spoken about Weev. She has even appeared on a podcast at WFMU with Weev and, in a sense, inadvertently spoken in his defense. In a documentary that was filmed in 2012, I had this to say about Weev.
You meet Weev in person, and he's the nicest guy in the world. He'll hold the door open for you, he'll grab you a soda if you ask him, and if you meet him online, he'll spew a whole bunch of anti-Semitic crap, and he'll be really mean.
It is no secret that Weev is considered to be one of the most notorious trolls in the world. He's affiliated with the Daily Stormer, and yes, in 2012, in a snippet, while I was being recorded for a part of a documentary, I said he spews anti-Semitic things online because everyone who knows him knows that for the longest time he would put racist and anti-Semitic things on the internet. In fact, one of the things he created is called the GNAA. I can't actually tell you what it means because if I say those words, I could get in trouble. Seriously, GN, and then it's Association of America, but the G and the N, if I said those actual words, YouTube would probably ban me. But Angela Nagel, the writer of Kill All Normies, was critical of Gabriella Coleman because she actually kind of played him up and spoke in his defense, when for the longest time we knew Weev was putting racist things on the internet. In a story for The Baffler, Nagel writes, "In the time since the attack, Weev has since become famous for hacking a phone company, a maneuver that triggered a Twitter-based Free Weev campaign, which gained support from prominent progressive endorsers such as Lori Penny and Gabriella Coleman. Embarrassingly for those who expressed the view fashionable in the heyday of the Occupy movement, the 4chan/B is a counter-hegemonic space, and that trolls in 4chan vein are, as Coleman argued, inheritors of the Dadaist and Situationist traditions. Weev is a fascist sympathizer with a swastika tattoo on his chest. Penny claimed to be unaware of his far-right views, while Coleman not only continues to defend his rights as a hacker, but also presents him as an endearingly impish figure in her latest book." She says commentators like Coleman have lent a certain credibility to the Beta Uprising's contention, that its motives are misinterpreted by a public that fails to grasp its unique brand of postmodern wit. Some people say they simply don't get that the betas are in a strictly for the lulz. But while forum chatter certainly doesn't inevitably escalate to violence, and even the worst speech does not amount to violence, some of 4chan's self-described geeks have taken their faux ironic bigotry offline. So let me reiterate. Gabriella Coleman, who, listen, I think is a good person, I have nothing against her, but I do have to point this out if Data and Society is going to be trying to accuse me of radicalizing people. Coleman has been accused by the left of essentially speaking in the defense and defending the rights of someone associated with the Daily Stormer. She has even said that what he does is for the lulz in her book. What Weev does for the lulz. While many people believe that Weev is simply a troll, he does have a giant swastika on his chest. So I'm not going to tell you what to believe or not. I'm simply going to say that Data in Society has a board member who is much more directly connected than most of the people on that list. Now, I do want to be as fair as possible. Coleman has denounced this. She said, Weev is a troll's troll, a rare standout in a field that mostly spawns so many garden varieties, she writes. This is partially why so many people, including me regrettably, would write off Auernheimer's tendency toward anti-Semitic and racist rants as just trolling. But I will give some pushback because although I have spoken about people's rights on the internet, in 2012, as I've shown you, I mentioned people knew this. They knew that Weev was doing these things. What more do you have to say? Is it defensible what she wrote about him? Look, I haven't read her book, but I can say that many people have been criticizing her for a long time for this. Data and Society has an advisor who has spoken in such a way that it could downplay what Weev has done. And if that's your opinion, that's fine. But some people disagree, and the point I'm trying to bring up is, if Data and Society is going to claim that we are a path to radicalization, they need to look at themselves first. But also, can we talk about ABC News actually playing devil's advocate in a debate between Richard Spencer and Lacey McCauley? In it, the host for ABC News says,
McCauley refuses to condemn that infamous punch Spencer took on Inauguration Day.
But Lacey, I gotta stop you there. A punch in the face is a punch in the face.
Genocide is genocide. I'm sorry, but I don't think anyone has sympathy for people who are actually actively advocating for policies of genocide.
I'm not.
You would like a white homeland, and to me, that says genocide. People are going to suffer, people are going to die. I have no respect for that mentality.
I don't want anyone to die.
Spencer blames Antifa for most of the violence between the groups, but also insists his people will defend themselves.
ABC News has placed Spencer against Antifa and done the journalistic thing of arguing both sides. Is ABC News a path to radicalization? If you want to know why people on YouTube did interviews and debates with Richard Spencer, it's because he was extremely newsworthy following being punched, and a lot of people wanted to challenge his ideas. Which is probably why Ezra Klein had a debate with Sam Harris. Sam Harris is included on this list. Ezra Klein is a part of the Alternative Influence Network, whether he wants to accept it or not. By their logic, Ezra Klein promoting Sam Harris has essentially given a platform or created that connection. Because if someone listened to this show by Ezra Klein, they would then hear about Sam Harris, they would then watch Sam Harris's show, and all of a sudden, they're on a path to radicalization. And the same could be said for ABC News. Now, you may be arguing that Tim, Ezra Klein isn't on YouTube. This is about YouTubers. Actually, it is not about YouTubers. The report also makes more factually inaccurate statements when they claim that people use YouTube to promote certain ideas. That's factually untrue, and that's proven in their own report. In their list, they have Antonia Okafor, no channel. James Damore, also no channel. And Mike Enoch, also no channel. Another thing that's important to note, they frequently put previously the Rebel Media in many of people's lists, noting that they were working for the Rebel Media. However, you'll note that they don't put Vice News in my name, and Vice News has actually platformed more white supremacists and white nationalists than I have and probably ever will. I think there's a possibility that this might be a hoax. Maybe it's an attempt at proving the media will publish anything without actually looking into it, because the report says that people are using YouTube, but 3 of the people listed don't even have YouTube channels, so clearly something's wrong here. It makes claims about the beliefs of everyone in the group, which is not true, and it omits several people who should probably be on the list based on our own logic, which would include Ezra Klein for having platformed Sam Harris. But not only that, he's written rebuttals and articles in response to Sam Harris and Dave Rubin. That means somebody who goes to Vox will be exposed to Rubin and Harris and others, and that will lead them down the path of radicalization. And the point is, it's not about YouTube, it's not about the algorithm, because there are people she listed who don't even have channels. To what extent, then, is James Damore using YouTube to promote ideas when he simply did interviews with people who asked it? The bigger concern I have is that she created a list with many people who have respectable views. Joe Rogan is kind of a fence-sitting lefty libertarian who's actually advocated for universal basic income, a rather socialist position. Dave Rubin is a gay married man who believes in many left-wing values, prison reform, pro-marijuana, and he hosts people on a talk show no different than what ABC did. In fact, Dave Rubin might have been actually a bit more critical because ABC actually played devil's advocate a bit with Richard Spencer's position. But you also have Ben Shapiro, who is a well-known conservative commentator. You have people like Steven Crowder, who is just a pretty mainstream conservative voice. You put all of these people on a list with the alt-right, and you put Richard Spencer's name in big and bold. The only thing this list can do is help normalize and reinvigorate the alt-right. Already, people are saying this is an excellent recommended list. Personally, I would not recommend some of the people on this chart. I would not recommend you go watch their YouTube videos. In certain circumstances where people are newsworthy, yes, they should be interviewed, no different to how Huffington Post and even ABC News have interviewed them, and even how Vox has interviewed them. I think it's fair to say the report is just an op-ed. It's an opinion piece about someone who selectively cherry-picked information, didn't actually provide data to the journalists who wrote about it in most circumstances. I actually reached out to journalists, and it was confirmed to me that they didn't have any proof backing the claims made by Rebecca Lewis. But Ezra Klein actually responded to Dave Rubin by writing an article that argued, yes, Rubin and others are reactionary right. And the most alarming thing is how he frames it. Rubin said he was gay married, pro-choice, pro-pot, against the death penalty, for reforming prison drug sentencing. How is he a part of the reactionary right? And Ezra Klein agreed that Rubin is. Now listen, I don't necessarily agree with everything Rubin has to say, but what worries me is that if you're going to claim that someone like me, who is a social liberal, who believes that there is a such thing as good social justice, who believes that diversity is good, who believes that someone like Bernie Sanders might be our best shot at the presidency, is a reactionary right-winger, you're clearly drawing lines between the authoritarian left and the libertarian left. I am a social liberal, not a social libertarian, but the difference means that the authoritarian left feels they have a right to use violence and coercion to force other people to live the way they want, and for me, I believe in democracy. I believe in treating each other as equals. I believe in ending racism and bigotry and all of these things, and I believe it can be done through peaceful understanding and reform. But apparently, that makes me a bad person. And apparently, Ezra Klein, who is also technically a part of this network, disagrees, and his only distinction is that one side is authoritarian, but because they're the revolution, you are reacting to the revolution, that's where the word comes from, and thus, you are the reactionaries. There's a lot more that I could cover, but I've tried to go over as much as I can, so thanks for hanging out and watching. Stay tuned, I'll have more videos on my second channel today at 6 p.m. and more videos every day at 4 p.m. You can follow me on Twitter at Timcast, stay tuned, and I'll see you all next time.